Distinguished colleagues and guests, good afternoon. It's March 24th, 2021, 2 p.m. Moscow time. We're beginning the panel session for the defense of the thesis by Kazahara Kota. The thesis is submitted for the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences. The specialization is 070003, general history, modern history of the 20th century. The topic of the thesis is Soviet-Japanese border conflict at Lake Khasan in 1938, described in archival materials of Japan, facts and assessments. Under the order issued by St. Petersburg State University, as of January 11th, 2021, number 9/1, I, Alexander Filipov, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of the Department of History of Far East Countries of St. Petersburg State University, was appointed the chairman of the board. They would also approve the candidacies of the members of our dissertation board, and let me introduce them. Ramil Baleyev, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor, Institute of International Relations, Kazan Federal University. Sergei Poltorak, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor, Pushkin Leningrad State University. Viktor Bacharov, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Theory of Social Development of Asian and African Countries of St. Petersburg State University, is absent. The following members of the board are working remotely: Dmitry Streltsov, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor, Head of the Department of Oriental Sciences, Moscow State Institute of International Relations of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Dmitry, do you see us and hear us? Yes, hello. Dear colleagues, I see you well and hear you well as well. Okay, thank you. And Petr Padalka, PhD, Aoyama Gakuin University in Japan. Do you see us and hear us? Yes, I do. Okay, thank you very much. And we also have our candidate for the degree, Kazahara Kota, who is with us via remote connection today. Kazahara Kota, do you hear us and see us? Yes? Thank you. Taking into account the fact that our candidate for the degree is working remotely, I raise a question on the possibility to continue our session of the board. So let us vote. Ramil, what do you think? Yes, we continue. Thank you. Sergei? Yes, we continue. Dmitry, do you agree to continue? Yes, sure. And Petr, do you agree to continue? Yes, I do. Okay, thank you. And I, as the chairman, also agree with the fact that we should continue. That's quite a sensible decision. So, therefore, I announce that we continue our session with our candidate for the degree present remotely. Everyone voted for that. And we also have the thesis supervisor, Evgeny Osmanov, candidate of Historical Sciences, Associate Professor of the Department of Theory and of Social Development of Asian and African Countries of St. Petersburg State University. So, dear colleagues who are working remotely, in order to improve the quality of our connection, don't forget to turn off your microphones, but also turn them on when I give you the floor. I would also like to inform you that the panel session of the dissertation board is being recorded and broadcast on the St. Petersburg State University website, and it is also interpreted from Russian into English and vice versa. Currently, we have an email address posted on the page with live broadcast of the board session, and all listeners can submit their questions to Mr. Kazahara Kota online. The questions regarding the thesis or current scientific discussion, and thus participate in the discussion. These questions will be forwarded to me by our technical service, and I will read them out during the discussion. The questions must be related to the presentation of the candidate for the degree, to the content of the thesis, and do not forget to give your name and position if you submit a question, so that the author would know that. So that we would know the author. The questions that have nothing to do with the scientific discussion or the dissertation content will not be voiced, as well as anonymous questions. Under the order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, approved by local normative acts, the session of the dissertation board is valid, providing 2/3 of the appointed board members are present, and the total number is not to be fewer than 4 people. Our dissertation board consists of 6 people. 5 are with us today, including 2 members of the board who are working remotely. I beg your pardon, yes. 2 members of the board are working remotely, and 1 review will be read out. So I believe I said everything that I should. Okay. We have a multimedia connection with all the members of the board as well as with our candidate for the degree. Therefore, we have a quorum. So thank you very much, dear colleagues. Our session should not last more than 2 hours, and the agenda is as follows. First comes the chairman's presentation about the documents submitted by the candidate for the degree and their conformity with the requirements. Then chairman's replies to questions, if any, 5 minutes for that. Then candidate's short presentation, providing an overview and findings of the research, 15 minutes for that. Then questions to the candidates regarding the presentation, no more than 2 minutes per question. Then candidates' replies to the questions, 5 minutes for all questions. If we will have certain corrections, I'll mention that later. Then reports on the thesis. The board members will be taking the floor in turns to provide their reviews and questions. 10 minutes per member of the board. Then the candidate will answer the questions, 20 minutes for all. Then open discussion. Everyone willing to speak out may be given the floor if they want to give their positions or ask certain questions on the topic of the study. 10 minutes per speaker. And if you're willing to speak out, kindly don't forget to fill in the registry form and introduce yourself before you're giving the floor. Then the chairman will ask the questions submitted during the broadcast via our website. And I would also like to inform you that the questions that take more than 10 minutes to be read won't be voiced. Then candidates' replies to the questions, 10 minutes per question. Then a speech by candidate's thesis supervisor, 3 minutes for that. Then 5-minute discussion before the open balloting on conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. The discussion of the results of the defense is not broadcast. 5 minutes for that. Then open balloting, vote counting and recording the results in the protocol. Next, we're going to make a decision on whether to confer the academic degree or not. And finally, we'll give the floor to our candidate for the degree for a closing speech, no more than 2 minutes for that. Any comments or questions on our agenda, dear colleagues? Okay. No objections? Okay. Therefore, let me start. But first of all, kindly switch off the sound on your mobile phones, dear colleagues. That's quite a timely remark. So there won't be any noise interference. So, dear members of the board who are working remotely, kindly don't switch off your mobile phones so that we would contact you at once in case of a technical failure. So let me start. The chairman's presentation. The thesis by Kasahara Kota for the academic degree of the candidate of Historical Sciences, the specialization 070003, General History, Modern History of the 20th Century, is titled Soviet-Japanese Border Conflict at Lake Hassan in 1938, described in archival materials of Japan, Facts and Assessments. The thesis was approved for the defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University, issued January 20th, 2021, number 371/1. Kasahara Kota has prepared his dissertation at St. Petersburg State University, and Evgeny Osmanov, candidate of Historical Sciences, Associate Professor of the Department of Theory of Social Development of Asian and African Countries of St. Petersburg State University, is the thesis supervisor. The list of eight published works describe the research findings. They include 3 papers published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science, and no papers in publications indexed in Web of Science and Scopus. The candidate has submitted the full set of documents to the Academic Secretary. The above-mentioned documents comply with item 12 of section 3 of the order, and all the documents provided, as far as I'm informed, comply with the requirements and are found in the certification file. And the curator of the defense, member of the Department of Dissertation Board Support, present here, has all the copies. And before I give the floor to our candidate for the degree, I would like to ask members of the board if there are any general questions to the candidate for the degree, and is there need to consider the whole set of documents submitted by the candidate for the degree. Piotr, what do you think? No need for that. Dmitry, no need for that. No? Okay. I also believe that there is no need to consider the list of documents. So we're approaching one of the key moments of our session, the short presentation by Mr. Kasahara Kota. So you have roughly 15 minutes for your report, and please, I give you the floor. So I believe we're going to, yes, to see the shared screen. Okay. Distinguished Chairman, distinguished members of the dissertation board, and dear guests who are present in the hall or with us remotely. I'm going to deliver a report on my topic, the Soviet-Japanese border conflict at Lake Hassan in 1938 in archival materials of Japan, Facts and Assessments. This work is dedicated to the consideration of basic events and facts of the border conflict at the Hassan Lake in the archival materials of Japan and USSR. As the subject of study, we consider the archives of Japan, the approaches and assessments of Japanese scientists, as well as the assessments of participants and contemporaries of the conflict. And this conflict was the first large-scale military conflict in the contemporary time. The chronological framework covers July 29, August 11, 1938. And during this time, there were military actions between the Soviet and the Japanese armies. One of the priorities of the contemporary Russian Federation is the establishment of stable partners' relations with surrounding states. And we know that the establishment of long-term mutually advantageous ties between Russia and Japan is hindered by certain interstate problems, the heritage of the 20th century. And we can believe that in order to find efficient ways out of the problem, we should first of all detect their sources. Therefore, the studying of various aspects of these problems in the relations of our countries is rather important and quite relevant in contemporary conditions. It should be mentioned that currently the representatives of Russian and Japanese historical science have different approaches to the assessment of the character of this border conflict. Historians, as a rule, have an apologetic position regarding the activities of their countries in these events. And scientific studies that are unbiased and have no cliches, that are aimed at objective truth, are particularly important to overcome the current suspicious situation. And it is of particular importance to consider the studies aimed at defining the logic of the Japanese party in this conflict, and for this we require unbiased study of the archival materials of Japan. Thus, the relevance of this study is explained by the following factors. First of all, its ideological bias as well as political bias that led to a deficit of objective scientific studies. Second, there's lack of studies of Japanese documents in Russia, therefore it reduces the source base. Third, we lack comprehensive studies of this conflict among Japanese historians. And fourth, there are certain doubtful, dubious questions that are covered in historical works that prevent us from obtaining the true knowledge. The goal of the dissertation study is to provide understanding and interpretation of the basic facts of the border conflict on Hassan Lake, considering the achievements of contemporary science, and create conditions for further comprehensive fundamental studies. The goals that require solution include the following ones. First, studying the general political context and geographical peculiarities of the environment, we should define the logic of behavior of the parties in the conflict, providing interpretation and understanding of the events. Then detect the role of the subjective factor in the context of official Tokyo position. Third, provide an analysis of military positions of both belligerent parties at the moment of the end of the conflict, because these nuances led to certain difficulties in negotiations. Interest negotiations. Fourth, provide an assessment on the losses of the parties depending on the military readiness of the military personnel of the belligerent parties, and carry out comparative analysis and compare the results with traditional assessments in historiography of both countries, and detect the scale of involvement of civil population and the reaction of civil population to the events. As for the scientific novelty of the dissertation study, first of all, we should say that it provides a broad approach to the consideration of this border conflict at Hassan Lake, and we consider it through the prism of studying of unknown sources. And the majority of Soviet and Russian works in this field were based on the materials of their party of the conflict. And above all, we should state that there are certain factors that contribute to the scientific novelty. In Russian historiography, the events that took place within the Japanese army during this combat were not well studied. We also make a conclusion on this attack of Japan that is based on the Tokyo orders on non-aggression. And this contradicts the assessments of Soviet Russian historians. And also there is a conclusion of mixed understanding between the USSR and Japan of the Hunchun Protocol of 1886, and this was, by the way, the point of when this combat started. And for the first time in Russian historiography, we detected the role of subjective factor in the mechanism of this origin of military conflict. And we also introduced original sources and materials of Japanese archives to circulation. The main conclusions are as follows. The main prerequisite to the start of this military operation was the difference of understanding of the border between USSR and Manchuria. Both parties were based on the same document, Hunchun Protocol, but the interpretation of the protocol differed. Japan believed that the border was going along the western shore of the Hassan Lake. USSR believed that the border was going along the ridges of volcanoes. The position of official Japanese authorities was not to let the military action start. However, Japanese military men were rather aggressive, had a rather aggressive mindset, and this led to certain actions of Japanese military men that were not coordinated with official Tokyo in response to the behavior of Soviet bordermen near the Berziman height. Therefore, this was the subjective factor of the start of the military conflict. And also we should say that Japanese commander Sayataka Komatsu behaved in an unauthorized way. Third, considering the numerical superiority of the Red Army over the Japanese one, we should also take into account the triple losses of the Soviet army. And these losses were the result of unpreparedness to such a large-scale military conflict, and the Japanese party was also based on very early opinion on their superiority, and this played an evil joke with the Japanese army later on in their combat on Halhin Gol. Fourth, we cannot say for sure that at the point of conclusion of the peace agreement on the peak of Zazorna Hill, we had some other army because the ridge was conquered by both parties. Fifth, Soviet. We should mention that one of the facts that also led to the victory of the Soviet party was the involvement of civil population in this conflict. And when we analyzed this fact, we made a conclusion that there was a geographic factor as well. For USSR, this conflict happened directly on the border, and the civil population considered this conflict not as a territorial dispute, but rather as a patriotic war in the Far East. Sixth conclusion, Soviet leadership was very serious about the results of the conflict, and they analyzed it and the results and concluded that the army was unprepared for military actions, and they also decided to improve the training of the military and to provide more weapons. And above all, problems were detected in the preparation of forests region overall. These problems were the reason of these problems were one of the reasons to repress Blücher and to divide the administrative formation of the Far East region into Khabarovsk and Primorsky Krai. In Japan, the general headquarters made quite early and disputable conclusion on the success of the first campaign, ignoring the final documents on the Hassan Lake, and Kwantung Army also did not give full attention to these documents, and they did not carry out an analysis of the military actions. And as a result, among Japanese military officers believed that there is a very belligerent mindset in the army that would allow to overcome some objective difficulties due to this psychological superiority, and this was a mistake. Thus, the border conflict at Lake Hassan provides very rich and useful historical material that allow us to understand the order and the logic of interactions between the two countries, and it also explains the interest to these events among the representatives of historical science in both countries. And as a positive trend, we can mention the increasing attention of scientists to archive materials of the second party. And we can believe that this approach may promote understanding of the basic motives and logics of actions of the parties, and this will allow to find common grounds on some questionable points. Thank you very much for the attention. Thank you very much. Are there any questions to the candidate for the degree on the report, on the presentation that reflects the basic provisions of the thesis? If there are any questions, we'll listen to the answers. Okay, dear colleagues who are working remotely, are there any questions? No questions on the content of the report. Okay, thank you so much. Piotr, what about you? No questions on the report. Thank you. Thank you. Ramil, no questions. Sergey, what about you? No questions as well. Okay, I don't have any questions as well. So we believe that you impressed us by your speech. And indeed, that's quite interesting because, well, I believe we'll listen to questions later on when we consider the reviews of our board members. And now, I'm going to give the floor to our members of the board to read out their reviews, to give their assessments of the dissertation. So the board members will provide their questions or maybe offers, and then we'll read out some external reviews if there are any of them submitted. You can answer the questions at once, or you can answer all questions after all the reviews. So I offer to answer the questions at once after the review. So, Ramil, what's your opinion? Yes, I agree. Sergey, what about you? Dmitry? Yes? Piotr, what about you? So, yes, everyone agrees with that. Okay. Then, when a board member gives his review, or you are providing the answers to the questions? Okay. As far as I'm informed, we had no external reviews, and they were not submitted. Therefore, we won't read anything else, any other reviews. So, next article in our agenda. I would like to mention that all the reviews were published on the St. Petersburg State University website. Therefore, I believe that we should read just the basic points, basic provisions, questions or comments to our candidate for the degree, if you don't mind. So, Dmitry, what about you? No? Further? Sergey? Ramil? So everyone agrees with that proposal. Okay. So we won't read out the full reviews. We'll just give the key points in these reviews. Okay. The board members will deliver the reviews, as well as I will do that. And now I give the floor to Ramil Valiev. So thank you very much, dear colleagues. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the administration of St. Petersburg State University for the opportunity to take part in the discussion of this dissertation. I will just give the basic assessments, and maybe I'll draw attention to the comments or recommendations that one may find in my review. Sure enough, the discussion of this thesis allows us to say that the history of relations between the Russian Empire and Russian Federation with Japan, and the relevant problems of contemporary interstate connections and mutual stereotypes and historical events, and also the behavior in the global and regional politics is still quite a relevant field in international studies. And we do not question the historical credibility of the geopolitical and military political event that Gazahara Kota considers in his work. In 1930s, 40s, were connected with very important processes, not only in mutual relations. I beg your pardon. I ask Piotr to turn on the camera. According to our regulations, the cameras should be turned on. Piotr, please turn on your camera. Thank you. And so the events of 1930s, 1940s, just a short break. Ramil, yes, just a short break. Let's wait for a colleague to turn on the camera. Maybe Piotr does not hear us. Maybe this was a technical break. No, I hear you. Yes, we need a video connection as well. Yes, unfortunately, there was this technical interruption. I beg your pardon for that. Okay. Let's try to hold on, otherwise we'll have to announce the technical break. So we should have this visual presence. Okay. Thank you. So, Ramil, please. I beg your pardon, continue. Okay. So, 1930s, 1940s have a special place in the history of relations of the Soviet people and Japan, and in those complicated processes that took place in East Asia, in the Far East. Therefore, this explains the interest to the materials represented presented by our candidate for the degree. In Japanese studies, especially if we talk about the studies of Russian and Japanese relations, we have a set of works and different studies on the topic. Had certain problems with chronology, and not all the aspects were covered in these studies, and therefore there were other problems as well. And current studies are characterized by the study of relations between the two states in the and also we should consider the interaction of economic and military and political processes that took place in the Far East and in the East and Central Asia. That's still, some of them still continue, and we should take into account the general mindset and conclusions of the Japanese and Russian scientists considering the problem, because these materials influence the understanding of relations, and certainly this explains the attitudes of young people, and this will define the paradigm of our relations in future. And currently in domestic literature we see a new level compared to 1970s, 80s, and it demonstrates a comprehensive approach to this historical topic and of relations of 1920s, 25 and 1930s. And I believe this work of Kasahara Kota is a valuable contribution in Russian historiography and in Japanese historiography if we talk about the conflict on Hassan Lake. Therefore, the study of history and interstate cooperation on the eve of the Second World War, considering this aspect, this work of Kasahara Kota is of particular importance. And the materials provided, as well as the conclusions and their scientific discussion at St. Petersburg State University, allows us to cover a very important topic, that this local military conflict is a component of a broader spectrum of problems between USSR and Japan. Overall, we should pay attention to the fact that the thesis has its author's line to summarize the historical events and provide concepts on the topic. And this work also has a lot of information on the assessment of the problem at current stage, and it can be considered as quite an original dissertation. The search, the analysis, and systematization of materials on the topic is of particular importance for historiography of contemporary Russia and Japan. And the thesis by Kasahara Kota is a finished multi-aspect study, quite objective, and it makes a contribution to the overall information on the causation of the events at Hassan Lake, and this being a large-scale conflict defined the character of further relations with Japan. Thus, the materials and the topics of these events are interesting not just from the point of view of local military conflict. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the study is quite comprehensive and it has a systemic character. The author used methodology of historiography and historical source studies, and the relevance is not questioned because the author used historical analysis, and we all know that that's politically biased problem that we had between USSR and Japan. He managed to systematize the information from archive centers of both countries, and thus he expanded the historical source. An objective comprehensive analysis and systematization of information of interstate and dramatic military conflict in the region that was aimed to minimize contemporary factors that complicate the interaction between the two countries. Should be also mentioned. So the work is also well structured. All the methods are mentioned, as well as all the goals. Your colleagues, I won't dwell on the materials, dealing with analysis of the key chapters of the thesis, but I'll mention that the materials and conclusions provided in the chapters allow us to consider the author's contribution to the topic. And as for the practical value, we can see that there is enough information. There are a lot of author's conclusions and novel documents that were introduced. And I would like also to mention my comments and questions and recommendations that are of particular importance considering our discussion. First, certainly this dissertation has a lot of factual material, but in some cases we lack analytics. Second, in the text we have style, punctuation, and misprints. And third, in prospects we need to expand the material source base, and we should analyze Russian funds, Russian archives. I've listed them in my review. And I believe certainly we should organize this comparative analysis, comparative review with all the materials given in contemporary Japanese archives. Fourth, unfortunately, you were limited by the Russian and Japanese sources, and there are also European, Chinese, and American materials as well. And fifth point is that we should also pay attention to discussions and disputes of the USSR and Japan in 40s, 50s. So you should have provided the assessments of the scientists on these key points of relations, and also to contradictions between these approaches. And also we should consider these relations from the point of view of this conflict. And overall, my conclusion is as follows. The thesis by Kasahara Kota, titled Soviet-Japanese Border Conflict at Lake Hassan in 1938, described in archival materials of Japan. Facts and assessments meets the requirements of the order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and Kasahara Kota deserves the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences and specialization general history, modern history of the 20th century, and Article 11 of the above-mentioned order is not violated. Thank you. Thank you, Ramil. As we've agreed, our candidate for the degree will answer questions after each speech, so please, you have the floor. Professor, thank you very much for your comments. I will improve my Russian in order to minimize my mistakes, and I will try to continue working on the topic, and will introduce new materials not just from Russia and Japan. But in one work it was impossible to cover all the topics. Therefore I started with the Japanese materials, but I will continue my studies. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you very much, Mr. Kasahara Kota. Ramil, are you satisfied with the answer? Yes? Okay, thank you. Now I give the floor to Sergei Poltorak, so please. Distinguished colleagues, on the one hand it's easier for me to mention this thesis because I participated in the preliminary discussion, but on the other hand it's more difficult because there's this tradition of giving some comments or remarks, and if you read my review that was already published, I believe you'll see that I have no negative remarks in my review. That's not explained by my loyalty to this work, but rather it is explained by the fact that when we discussed this work for the first time a year and a half ago, I had a lot of comments on this dissertation, and I'm really grateful to our candidate for the degree for being very diligent about my comments, for paying attention to them, and I could not just invent any other remarks. I won't say that I like everything in this work, but still I won't give something new, and I'll give you my general impression on the work. First of all, I believe that that's an innovative work, and that's not an exaggeration. It is innovative not because it introduces some new sources that we had or didn't have in Russia. Here I'm referring to the documents of the Japanese General Headquarters, but not only that. I also believe that our candidate for the degree had a very innovative approach to the assessment of these events. The complexity of the study of this problem and others also is that no matter how hard we try to be objective, certainly that's the topic that's closely connected with politics, with the old epoch, of current epoch, and it's hard to ignore that. And one of the advantages of this work is that Mr. Kota managed to stick to this objective interpretation. So he tried to be objective, and he also tried to stay away from this political bias connected with the problem. That's a very hard task, but he managed to perform that. And I would say that to some extent the thesis is a breakthrough in the study of the problem. What I missed here, certainly that's a local event, yet unfortunately it led to very sad events that shook the world, the entire world. The Hassan Lake events were a kind of test of both parties, and our candidate for the degree explains his author's view that is certainly important, and he believes that there's a certain unexpected element. Well, I cannot agree with that, but I believe that's quite a novel position. But regardless of how surprising this situation would be, still, political consequences were exceptionally important, and they defined the direction of this further developments between the countries that we had. What's also important, you see, we may have certain military events the results of which are very hard to assess. For example, Soviet-Polish War for 1920s, when Lenin and Pilsudski said that their armies won. You see, in case with July-August 1938, it's really both countries believed they were winners, and both parties had their arguments for that. Therefore, I really respect the achievements of our candidate for the degree that gave his point of view, maybe not the one that many Japanese scientists like, but from this point of view, this victory, regardless of the fact that Soviet army suffered more, still he believes that if we talk about victory, overall victory, it could be given to the Soviet army. That's a hard conclusion, but a very developed one, and it is not shared by everyone in contemporary historiography. And not all the Russian scientists support this conclusion. And summarizing, I would like not just to mention high professionalism of the candidate for the degree, but I would also like to mention his boldness, because choosing such a topic and defending it in a Russian university, you have to be very bold to do that. And I'm really glad that we are working with wise colleagues that can really understand this fact. And as for conclusion, there is no doubt that this thesis fully meets the requirements of the university, and it deserves the academic degree of in specialization general history. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sergey. So, Mr. Kasahara, we give the floor for an answer. Sergey Nikolaevich, thank you so much. I'm really happy to hear your words, and I will continue in future to work on the topic. Thank you very much once again. Thank you. So that's the answer. Thank you. So, Dmitry, your review. Thank you very much. Alexander. I'll try to be short as well. The more so because my review was already published on the website. I would like to join in and to support my fellow colleagues that that's an innovative work, and indeed it fills a very important gap in Japanese studies in Russia that is connected with the absence of archive materials of Japan on this topic. And what is more, we understand that the works of Russian scientists dedicated to the topic have ideological bias. There are certain stereotypes in place that we've seen developing during these decades, and it's hard to stay away from them. And such materials provide the grounds for more objective analysis of these events. And what's also important is that this work has really unique materials. That's mapping materials. These are materials from the Japanese archives that indeed are of immense interest, and they demonstrate the scope of work that our candidate for the degree has performed, and also the tables that he compiled independently based on the archive sources. So that all demonstrates his contribution to science. And in this regard, the thesis has an opportunity to objectively assess these events and to introduce certain corrections to the scientific discourse that we have currently, and it allows to share the Japanese discourse as well, which is of particular importance. That's quite an innovation, because in Russia the opinion of Japanese scientists is practically not presented. So the materials given in the work allow us to eliminate many stereotypes that we have in our domestic historiography, mostly those that this conflict was quite victorious for the Soviet Union, that it was quite successful, the results were quite successful. And also it's important that the Soviet administration saw the results of this conflict more seriously, and they made proper conclusions. So that's a kind of criticism, self-criticism is present, and it's important that that's a Japanese scientist providing this view. So that's really scientific boldness of the work. And as for my remarks, I've given them in my review. I won't read them out, but I'll just dwell upon 3 points that I believe not just, well, questionable, but they may provide the grounds for discussion, for a certain doubt, so they may be used to continue our discussion. First of all, the reason of the conflict is reduced to subjective factor. So that's an aggressive mindset of lower ranks that was developed like that and provided an impetus to the conflict. Unfortunately, in the work, the author does not demonstrate the political background of this conflict, namely, on the one hand, these are peculiarities of the political model in Japan, in which the army located on the mainland, that's Guantan Army, and the Japanese group on the Korean Peninsula as well. So it was quite independent from the political circles, and it could impose its opinion to the politicians. I believe that this model should have been defined in the work, because it's like asking for it. Otherwise it's unclear how could officers of such a rank act in an unauthorized way without any doubts that they will be punished. Second point is an international political context of this conflict. That is the place of Manchuria in the colonial policy of Japan. And it's unclear from your work, why did Japanese military started to defend this border of Manchuria? Why were they so diligent about it? Because previously Manchuria was included in the Japanese Empire. And what are the reasons of such an activity of the Japanese military? If we consider that this was not closely connected with Japan, and Japanese military men did not even have these old maps based on which they could make a conclusion on this violation of the border by the Soviets. So in this regard, it would be expedient to provide more arguments to support the position of the order. Why did this become possible? Because military men did not fear being punished for their arbitrary actions. Therefore, it requires a certain explanation. And the last point that I would like to mention is connected with the civil population and the actions of civil population. And the Soviet army had broad public support. So the conclusion here is a bit exaggerated, that this support was an important factor in the victory of Soviet border troops. I believe it diminishes the role of the military, because it seems like without the help of peasants or some civilians, this victory would not be so real. Maybe this was a kind of help, but I believe you can't describe it as something quite impressive. And there are also certain style problems in the work. And overall, I would like to conclude saying that that's a finished work. It was performed at a high scientific level. It has a unified concept, and it's based on a lot of scientific and analytical materials. And sure enough, the Kazahara Kota deserves the academic degree of the candidate of Historical Sciences and specialization General History. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dmitry. So, please, Mr. Kazahara, your answer. Dmitry Viktorovich, thank you very much for constructive criticism. I understand what you're talking about. I won't stop here developing this topic, and in my future work I will consider the points that you've mentioned. Unfortunately, the candidate's dissertation had certain limitations in the volume of work, therefore I could not describe everything that I wanted in this work, and that's a pity that I did not fully cover this topic of Japanese militarism and its connections with politicians, but I'll continue doing that in future. Certainly military men were closely connected with politicians, but Japan had government that did not want conflict with USSR. They did not want to feel this defense capacity of USSR, because this could give rise to a large-scale military conflict. And all the Japanese documents that I have read do not support this idea that military were trying to test the USSR military powers in the Far East in order to strike in this region and to move forward their forces forward. But I will continue this topic, and if I find such documents, I'll publish them. Thank you so much for the comments. Thank you very much. Dmitry, are you satisfied with the answer? Yes, fully. Thank you very much. Thank you. And before I give the floor to our next speaker, I would like to first of all mention that we'll listen to Petr Padalka, and then I will announce a short technical break. But before that, I give the floor to Mr. Padalka and the answer to his review. So please, Petr. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to beg your pardon for the fact that I had to turn off my camera for a short period of time. So, Ramelia, I beg your pardon for this interruption. Yes. The thing is that we have aftershocks. Therefore, unfortunately, this was the reason. So, dear colleagues, I would like to start with the end of my review. I believe that Gasa Harikota deserves the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences and specialization general history, modern history of 20th century. And the candidate for the degree meets all the requirements of the order, and in this regard I believe that he should be granted the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences. And I believe that if we introduce certain corrections, this dissertation should be published as a science popular monography, and I've mentioned that in my review as well. And I hope that I won't have any further interruptions. And what I want to say, we know that Sun Lake conflict was the first military conflict between Japan and Russia, or rather Soviet Union, for 33 years after the end of the Soviet-Japanese War. I'm referring to the conflict between the armies, not about the intervention. And in this regard, any work dedicated to the topic attracts a lot of attention of colleagues, of experts, and of broad strata of population, regardless of how many time passed since then. And I really liked the new ideas of the author, and I partially described my impressions to him during a personal talk, and I've given some of my criticisms then, but I would like to mention the following fact. As for the participation of locals, and as for the reaction to the military conflict from the local citizens, it's very important to consider the approach of the author regarding the Korean population on the territory of the conflict. That is this episode that is ignored by Soviet scientists, and overall the role of civil population is of particular interest because it's noble. As Chinese during the Russian-Chinese War, Koreans were local citizens that were somehow or other interested in less bloodshed, though they did not participate in this conflict directly. And the fact that Korean people did not support the Japanese and the Soviet civil population supported their army, that's an interesting example of why we had such developments regarding the civil population in the Far East in the pre-war period. I believe this can be interesting for Russian colleagues as well if we consider the measures of the Soviet Party regarding locals. And also the question on border division is very interesting. We know that there were a lot of difficulties connected with this border division that are characteristic for that time, and they still remain right now. And why these tensions arose, I believe, considering this question will be useful to us even today. I did not agree with the conclusion of the victory of the Soviet army. The thing is that military victory is not defined by the scope of loss, but by the final result. And the result here was quite obvious. And the fact that Soviet army lost more than the Japanese army does not mean that Soviet army failed. So we can't add up this emotional component. So I understand the feelings of our Japanese colleague, but the result can't be interpreted otherwise. Someone wins, someone loses, and if the victor loses more, then what can we do with that? And it's important that the author shows the Japanese understanding of the initiative when we're talking about the military forces. It's interesting that it was repeated later on with the same actions of one against another. When we were talking about the Japanese Navy, army behaved with more constraint, and the Japanese fleet did not make any conclusions from the mistakes of their fellow military men. And we know that in the Pacific Ocean actions and in South Asian regions, the activities were explained by unauthorized actions of the military. And at the same time, it shows that it's not always that the Japanese respect to ranks, that is considered the archetype of Japanese behavior in any situation, is quite true. I really like the following points. I'll just want to praise the author for very good Russian and other languages as well. I got a 2-language text, and both texts were not native language texts. So both texts in Russian and in English. And that's not quite a popular choice for a foreigner when you write such works. In this case, the author prepared 2 texts in foreign languages, so there are 2 theses in 2 languages, foreign languages, and that's quite impressive. And that's for the first time that I see such a study. And there are very good English skills, and I believe that this recommendation to expand the bibliography source, I believe the author will do that. And I also like this friendly discussion, lack of political bias when we talk about border military tensions between the neighboring states. So I would like to mention this culture of narrative. And there's a very good style and text that allows to understand the content quite easily. And that's true not just for experts but for ordinary readers as well. Therefore, I wish to see this work published as a scientific pop book. But overall, I would like to mention that this topic can be continued, and I'm sure that the author plans to do that, to shift from Hassan to other topics as well. So it would be interesting to see further developments. And it would be interesting to learn whether the lessons of Hassan were learned well by the Soviet and by the Japanese armies. And overall, the introduction of new sources and new assessments for these old events, I believe that's very much welcome. And we are in Russia are now staying away from traditional views on all the border conflicts. of the previous times. Previously we thought that we were being attacked, that we are surrounded by enemies, and in this case the conclusions are quite interesting, that allows the Russian scientists to consider the foreign sources and conclusions and take a different look at our heroes and our losses. Unfortunately, a lot is connected with the 30s in our army, and it is seen through the prism of repressions of the top military ranks, including the ones that were working in the Far East. But such works allow us to make new conclusions and to take a different approach to the assessment of the professionalism of those people that were repressed. Maybe they were repressed for professional reasons, not for political ones. So this work gives us an opportunity to think about many other things, maybe the ones that do not have a direct connection, but still I believe the conclusions were quite valuable. I would like to thank our author once again, because I was very pleased to read the work, and I'm thankful as a reader and as a researcher who's working with the topic. I made a lot of interesting conclusions for myself, so thank you. Thank you very much, Piotr. So please, Mr. Gasahara, your answer to Piotr Padalka. Piotr Eduardovich, I am very grateful for your review. I understand all your comments, and I will certainly be more attentive to the points that you've mentioned, and I will take a more analytical approach. So thank you very much for your comments. Thank you. As I already mentioned this, we've listened to the reviews of 4 board members, and we have just 2 reviews left. The review of Professor Bachirov that I'm going to read out, and my review as well. So I offer to announce the first technical break right now for 10 minutes. Does everyone agree? Yes, thank you. So I announce the first technical break, number 1, for 10 minutes.
Спасибо.
Да, отлично. Судя по всему, можно продолжать. Значит,
So I would like to announce that our first technical break is over and we continue our session. As it was already mentioned today, I will voice the review of Professor Bocharov. I'll try to give a general overview, but maybe it will take a bit time. So Viktor Bocharov, in his review on the dissertation of Kasahara Kota on the topic Soviet-Japanese border conflict at Lake Hassan in 1938, described in archival materials of Japan, facts and assessments. Mentions the following thing. The author tries to overcome the apologetic positions of the scientists of both countries that frequently the actions are demonstrated as defensive actions, and also the author believes that covering of this event will improve the relations between the two countries, and that in accordance with the Japanese materials it can be called the baptism of fire in the novel history, and the presence of disputes among our countries really requires the development of objective assessment of this conflict for its reasons and the results and lessons that the countries learned. So indeed that's a very relevant task. And he also emphasizes that the author has analyzed a lot of scientific works, and he mentions that many works don't have comprehensive character if we talk about the understanding of this conflict. The reason here is the lack of Japanese sources in the Russian source base. That's an objective moment. And there are also subjective reasons, because certain historians don't want to take the archival documents of other country. And the author is trying to eliminate these drawbacks. And the subject of the study is the huge set of new sources, and as for the novelty of the thesis, the author pays a lot of attention to the study of approaches and assessments of the conflict by Japanese historians and also by direct participants of the conflict. So that's really quite novel for a thesis. And I can shortly quote the Japanese archives, the Institute of the Military of Defense of the Ministry of Defense, of the Institute of Social Sciences, of the Tokyo Institute, and of the Tokyo University, and others. So the materials are quite impressive. So these are the speeches of the emperor, the data on losses, the map documents, the memoirs of participants of the battle, and also interviews with participants. And there are not only Japanese materials, the author also studied different Russian archive sources. In our case, it's important to emphasize that these are the primary archives, the documents that describe the process from the Russian point of view, and also the methodology of the study is very interesting. Not only historical and dialectic approach is used, but also narrative and biographic approach. So it provides this micro history view as well. So we I won't read these words on the chapters, but still, in chapter 1, the author tries to share the differences in understanding of this point of passage of border, and in chapter 2, the author manages to restore the chronology of the conflict, and the review emphasizes that. Overall, the text is a contribution to history, and also the author introduced new materials that are hard to access, and author tried to eliminate political bias and tried to analyze the topic objectively. Many ideas and assessments of the order may seem quite unpleasant to the Japanese, and the Japanese colleagues and Japanese historians can have their view, but the author of the review mentions that certainly the use of anthropologic and historical anthropologic and microhistoric elements that we see in our science. So the author also mentions style problems, but certainly that's easy to explain for a person that doesn't have Russian as a native language. And also there is a conclusion on unauthorized behavior of one of Japanese commanders. So this action is seen as the reason of the conflict, but still materials that support this idea are quite interesting. So I believe that as the author of the review writes, that there are articles published on this dissertation as required by the university. So overall, the thesis, titled Soviet-Japanese Border Conflict at Lake Hassan in 1938, described in archival materials of Japan, Facts and Assessments, meets the requirements of the orders of September the 1st, 2016 on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and Kasahara Koto deserves the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences and specialization 070003, General History, Modern History of 20th Century. And Article 11 of the above mentioned order is not violated. So this was the review of Professor Bocharov from St. Petersburg State University. Now I give the floor to Kasahara Koto for answer. I would like to thank Viktor Vladimirovich for his opinion, and I promise all the members of the board to improve my Russian, and in future I will try to consider this topic of unauthorized behavior and political influence of the military. So I would like to thank for the advice. Thank you very much, Mr. Kasahara. I agree with your answer on behalf of Viktor Vladimirovich. So now I am going to read out my review on the topic, and I'll try to be quick. Certainly I would like to dwell upon certain points. The topic of the thesis is quite a relevant one, and it is connected with different events, and quite recently we've celebrated the 75-year anniversary of victory, and quite frequently we think about the a reconsideration of certain nuances of the Second World War and some conflicts that happened during that period of time. And this dissertation introduces new factual data and introduces new assessments based on the materials of the Japanese archives. And this supports the novelty of this study, and it's important that today we listen to a mature Japanese scientist that understands the specificity of methodological approaches to the study of history that are applied both in Russia and in Japan. The fact that the author got graduated in Japan and then improved his professional knowledge in St. Petersburg at the faculty, the Oriental Faculty of St. Petersburg State University. This really is quite impressive, and we should also mention that the author has this very good skills of scientific skills, and among the representatives of among the both Russian and Japanese scientists, there are sometimes opposing views, and our author managed to objectively understand the advantages and disadvantages of these approaches and provide a measured characteristic. And I believe that this attempt was quite successful because he managed to find reasonable assessments and wordings for his work. I won't dwell upon the details, but I would like to mention the following thing. In the introduction, we have this titled "The Level of Development of the Topic." Now, that's a paragraph that gives us a good historical bibliography analysis of materials that the author used. But still, it could be logically developed, and you can add more details and dedicate a special chapter to bibliography. Maybe the author will mention that as well, maybe not. Maybe he will take that into account in the future. Certainly a full-fledged chapter would change the genre of work and the study, and therefore the opinion of the author is the key one. In other reviews, colleague mentioned that in chapter 1 there is a detailed analysis of terminology of geographical titles, and the author provides this material both in Russian and in Japanese, and certainly in English as well. That's really great. As for the second chapter, I would like to give one comment. In paragraph 3, you mentioned the truce of August 10, but in the text before and after, you mentioned that this event happened on August 11. Maybe you will answer this question, or maybe you will just take that into account for your future studies. The thing is that there is a remark in the thesis, and it's mentioned on page 80 of the thesis, but as we are talking about the title of paragraph 3 and page 69, maybe we should consider that that's a technical mistake. And sometimes we may use certain titles for certain events. This could influence the choice of this term and definition as well. And as for conclusion, I believe that this thesis provides a general view on the situation, and it managed to provide a comprehensive analysis of this conflict situation at Lake Hassan. There were a lot of opinions and assessments mentioned, and as for the drawbacks, I would like to emphasize that these are quite single drawbacks. I would like to wish the author to give a kind of preliminary conclusions in each chapter that could be emphasized in the general conclusion. Sometimes it's more convenient for the reader. Bibliography could make up a separate block, I've already mentioned that, and also the literature sources include just 9 English sources. Well, maybe that's a drawback, but that's compensated by the number of different written materials in English, or in Russian, and in Japanese. And as for private remarks, I would like to mention that in the Russian tradition, the emperor of the puppet regime of Manchuria is mentioned as Pu-I separately, 2 separate words, but you write them together in one word. That's page 25 of the thesis. Not just a private comment, yet another private comment that can be also dubious regarding a situation from the point of view of Japanese scientists. In Russian text, Japanese names and surnames are written fully, like Japanese see first of all the surname, then the name. But starting with page 31, you use different norms, and during the first mentioning, you mention the full name, but after that you write it in a European format, name and surname. And this seems quite strange on page 70 when you mention the Japanese kernel E.2. And on page 69, we see that his name was Terisama. So maybe that's not a very good choice for Russian Japanese scientists. But if we think about other readers, maybe this option would be even more convenient for them. As for misprints, I believe I don't see a lot of them. Therefore, it's quite convenient to read this work. And as for the style, it is also rather good. As for the drawbacks, they are not compromising the overall high value of the thesis. And I believe this dissertation can reduce the fake stereotypes that the elimination of them is quite important if we talk about the establishment of good ties between the 2 countries. So the thesis is seen important in this regard. In the provisions, we can find the solutions to the problems that are important for Japanese studies, for the history of relations between the 2 countries. And I would like to recommend this thesis for publication as monography in the Russian language, and I hope that the members of the board will support my point of view. I believe there will be a bit of reconsideration of the format, because we're talking about a book rather than a dissertation. Maybe some articles will be shortened. So I offer to support this proposal. And as you prepare this thesis in the Faculty of Oriental Studies at St. Petersburg State University, therefore I believe we could support this opportunity to publish your book in the Russian language as a book. I believe it would be quite useful when we'll have a new, fresh work, not limited to just a thesis limits the book that more people will have access to. I believe this would be very useful for us. And the conclusions. The goals were fully fulfilled. The conclusions are substantiated and they're quite relevant and novel. The thesis of Gazahara Kota, titled Soviet-Japanese Border Conflict at Lake Khasan in 1938, described in archival materials of Japan, Facts and Assessments, meets the requirements of the orders of September the 1st, 2016. And Kasahara Kota deserves the academic degree of the candidate of Historical Sciences and specialization 070003, General History, Modern History of the 20th Century. And Article 11 of the above mentioned order is not violated. So, thank you very much, and now I give the floor to Mr. Kasahara for an answer. Alexander Viktorovich, thank you so much for your comments, for valuable comments. There was a problem of volume. Certainly I will try to describe this bibliography part in more detail, and in future I will be more attentive to the Russian Oriental science tradition. Thank you very much for the hint. Thank you very much. Okay. So I ask all the members of the board, dear colleagues, is everyone satisfied with the answers? Okay, thank you. And I am also satisfied. As we don't have a lot of participants due to pandemic, I still want to ask anyone, and not the members of the board, if anyone has any remarks that they wanted to mention. So, no one? Okay. So I want to ask whether we had any questions submitted. No questions? Okay. No questions submitted via email? Okay. As we had no questions, we proceed. Now I would like to give the floor to the thesis supervisor of our candidate for the degree, to Evgeny Osmanov. So please, you have the floor. Distinguished colleagues, as the thesis supervisor, I would like to mention that factor that is quite characteristic is that the candidate for the degree is very industrious. He was very strictly following all the rules that St. Petersburg State University has. He was exceptionally attentive to the advice that I gave and to the advice and recommendations of other experts during the discussion of the thesis. And certainly Kota, the topic that he chose initially gave rise to certain questions, such as strange topic for Japanese. Certainly that's not a topic for a thesis, and it will be hard to defend it, but we see that the result is quite impressive. It exceeded expectations, and as a result we see a very good high quality thesis that makes a contribution to the domestic Japanese study, and I believe it will be quite useful for the Japanese as well. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Evgeny. So I believe no answer should be given here. Okay, anyone else willing to speak out? No one? Then let me say a few words then. I've seen how industrious Mr. Kasahara was, how diligent he was in his work. The result is really impressive, and I hope that we will see the results of your today's defense that will promote further improvement of joint scientific studies between the historians of Japan and Russia. And I believe that this can be very efficient for the future. So, my best wishes. Maybe then we won't have time for that. As I understood, no one wants to speak out. Piotr, Dmitry, no one? Okay. Thank you so much. If there are no questions submitted via email, the discussion stops here. And before the final vote, I would like to ask the members of the board and candidate for the degree if there are any general questions on the procedure of our board session connected with this remote access that we have. Piotr, what about you? No? Dmitry? No? Sergey? Ramil? No one? Okay, I have no comments as well. Mr. Kasahara, any comments? No comments, okay. Okay. So, let us vote then. It's 4 p.m. already. Maybe due to delays in internet. So it's 4 p.m. Moscow time, and I raise a question. Distinguished colleagues, we have an opportunity to announce a short technical, to announce a break in order to discuss the results of this defense. How do you think? Do we need such a break to discuss the results, or we can continue without it? So, no need for that. Dmitry? No need for that, okay. And I do believe that we can do without this break. As the discussion is not required, we continue our session, and we are going to have a poll right now. Which member of the board is to answer the question publicly, openly, and independently? So we hear each other, we see each other. So let's ask for the opinions. Piotr, how do you believe? How do you think? Do you vote for the award of the academic degree or not? Yes, I vote for. Okay. Piotr, that's Piotr Padalka. Dmitry Streltsov, what's your opinion? I also vote for the award of the academic degree. Okay, thank you. Ramil, what about you? Also vote for. Sergey Potarak also votes for the award of the academic degree, and Alexander Filipov, me, I also vote for the award of the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences to Mr. Kasahara Kota. So the decision on the award of the academic degree of candidate of historical sciences and specialization 070003, general history, modern history, 20th century, was made, and everyone voted in favor. I would like to remind you that the decision of the dissertation board on conferring the academic degree is positive, provided more than 50% of the board members, but no fewer than 3 people voted in favor, and as one member did not have a chance to vote today, I would like to consult an expert. So we had 5 votes for, no one voted against, and no one abstained from the vote. Thus, the decision on the award of the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences and specialization in general history, modern history of the 20th century is made. And I give the floor to Mr. Kasahara Kota for the finalizing remarks. Please. Thank you, everyone who helped to organize this session, and I would like to thank the members of the board and the chairman of the board. I'm really grateful to all of you for your advice, and I would also like to thank my thesis supervisor, Evgeny Osmanov. That's a very important event for me, and I really have no words to thank you enough. Once again, thank you so much for the help. Thank you, Mr. Kasahara. And I believe that you thank many other people who gave you valuable advice and who supported you. And today's defense was really a very good one. And I believe that everyone present here personally and virtually can congratulate you with the award of the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences. Yes? The applause to our candidate. So I thank everyone for taking part in the board session. I would like to thank everyone for gathering here today. And I would like to thank everyone for the fact that we didn't have any technical failures. So I therefore close our session, and best wishes to everyone.